You've argued many times in front of the Supreme Court. Just an honest question. If you had to either represent Google or represent the DOJ, do you think you could do either effectively? Because I'm looking at the monopoly aspect of this.
Right.
And I think as a good lawyer, I could almost do either, because I don't see consumers. It's free. It's a great company. Consumers aren't being harmed. However, advertisers might not be getting a fair shake if they have to pay Google's prices because there's no competition. How would you argue it?
Well, both sides are going to have amazingly talented lawyers, and any competent lawyer would be able to present either side. In my view, I think the Department of Justice is going to prevail in this case. I think Google is a monopoly, and I think they have been abusing their monopoly power. And I think it's a pattern we've seen across big tech. It's been getting more and more brazen. There have been previous investigations into Google. Before that, there were investigations into Microsoft that ultimately resulted in a lawsuit and a settlement. But today's big tech is different. Google is $1 trillion company. The degree of power that has been concentrated in Silicon Valley by any level, big tech dwarfs Standard Oil in terms of size and economic might when it was broken up under the antitrust laws. It dwarfs AT&T when it was broken up by the antitrust laws. And I think big tech right now is using its power in a much more abusive way. So I'm glad the Department of Justice is bringing this case.
I mean, if you're really good at something, you can have a de facto monopoly. But you think that there's some things that aren't quite ethical going on in terms of maintaining the monopoly at Google.
Well, what we see them doing, and one of the things that presses the edges of the law in terms of the typical categories, is their abuse of power is not strictly monetary. I mean, it is maximizing profits. They've got $120 billion sitting around in cash. I guess that's kind of the money between the seats and the sofa. But it's not just profit maximization at the expense of consumers, because they're also monetizing your data, your private data, and they're using, so Google owns YouTube, and they use that to censor free speech, to censor political conduct. This comes right on top of what we saw last week, where Twitter and Facebook both decided to censor the New York Post and to silence news reporting. The New York Post had two blockbuster stories of alleged corruption of Joe Biden, one concerning Ukraine, another concerning his being offered millions of dollars from communist China. And both Twitter and Facebook prevented users. You couldn't tweet a link to those articles. They shut it down. Not only that, they've still shut down. Right now today, the New York Post can't put on social media its own stories. That really crossed a threshold. It crossed a line we've never seen before. We have seen big tech trying to censor individual users. We've never seen them taking on one of the biggest and most respected media outlets around. The New York Post is over 200 years old and was founded by Alexander Hamilton. And a handful of Silicon Valley billionaires are now saying they decide what the New York Post can report. They decide, presumably, what CNBC can report. That is a terrifying assertion of power, and it's an abuse of monopoly power to do it.
So, Senator, you stole my thunder, because Emma Jo Morris of the Post, the deputy editor there, said we're still blocked.
Yep.
And then Byron York retweeted that, and then you retweeted Byron York already this morning and said nothing to see here. So Twitter does serve a purpose, and if you can't get on it, you are being harmed, I think. And that's a lot of responsibility, and we know with great power comes great responsibility. You would say that both Google and Facebook, and how did they both know that this article was so disturbing that of course, they're not the only ones that aren't talking about it either. It's kind of across the board.
In antitrust law, there's a concept called conscious parallelism, which is you have major players in an oligopoly who are behaving similarly, even if they're not necessarily conversing with each other, they're just mirroring each other's actions. We see that in big tech, where these oligarchs, these modern-day oligarchs, are more and more brazen. They want Donald Trump to lose. It's not complicated what their objective is, and so their view is anything that is critical of Trump, they'll just silence. But that's the reason why last week I announced, along with Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, that the Judiciary Committee will be voting on subpoenas to subpoena Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg to come testify before us before the election, because the election interference here it is really brazen and it's dangerous. You know, you mentioned a minute ago my book, One Vote Away, How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. There's an entire chapter on that book on free speech and on the efforts to take away your rights of free speech, my rights of free speech, because I think people really care about how do we protect our rights and what are the threats to our constitutional rights right now today, because they are very much hanging in the balance.
Right. Senator, how does that view square with, oftentimes you've talked about the wonders of free markets, and also in the context of thinking about what a breakup would do to solve the problem you're talking about? You know, there are newsstands that carry certain newspapers and magazines and others, and there are other newsstands that don't. And I would imagine you would support that as a free market decision of somebody who owns those newsstands.
So, yes, I'm a big believer in the free market. And how to solve this problem is complicated. It is very complicated, and it doesn't fit into neat silos under the law. Nobody wants to see, here's the outcome that would be terrible. Nobody wants to see a federal speech police. If the federal government were suddenly deciding what speech was okay and what speech wasn't, that would be a terrible, terrible outcome. There are at least, however, 3 possible remedies, and I've chaired multiple hearings examining these in depth. Number 1, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That is a special immunity from liability that big tech gets that nobody else gets. They can't be sued. And it was a gift. It's a subsidy from the taxpayers to big tech. It was passed when they were just nascent, a nascent industry. They're now the largest corporate behemoths on the face of the planet. And Section 230 was passed with a background and an assumption that they would be neutral, that they would be like the town square. They wouldn't be actively censoring users and censoring the press. They've long ago abandoned that model, and they've decided to brazenly censor. If they're going to do that, there's no reason they should have that immunity from liability. Number 2, under the antitrust law, breaking up monopolies that are abusing antitrust power, abusing monopoly power has long been an authority and a responsibility of the federal government. And number 3, there's a remedy that sounds really in breach of contract and consumer deception. And the basic argument is as follows. When you sign up to a social media company and you follow someone, your understanding is you're going to see what they post, what they tweet. If they follow you, they're going to see what you post and what you tweet. Well, social media companies have decided to break that fundamental promise, to deceive consumers, because now if they disagree with what you say, they block your followers from seeing what you say. They throttle what you say. They shadow ban you. And the consumers have no choice in this. It's a bait and switch based on deception, and it's not for the consumer's benefits. It's to collect more power in Silicon Valley. I think this is the single biggest threat to free speech, to a free media, and to our democracy that we have in our country.
Senator, what's going to happen between Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi today? And what do you want to happen?
Look, I don't know what will happen. I've said for weeks now, in fact, we've discussed it several times, I don't believe Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want a deal. I think they have made the political judgment that maximizing economic pain is in their political best interest, that the more people who are unemployed and broke and pissed off, the better it is for Joe Biden. So I am very skeptical that we'll see a deal. This week, the Senate will vote once again on a $500 billion package that is targeted at helping small businesses, that is helping parents whose kids haven't been able to go to school, that includes my legislation that is the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation ever taken up on the Senate floor. And once again, every single Senate Democrat will filibuster that legislation. They will block it this week. They've done it previously. And their argument, it really is a crazy argument. They say $500 billion is not enough. Therefore, we insist on zero. That doesn't make any sense. I get they want to spend even more, but their refusal to move forward with even a penny before Election Day, that's not a policy disagreement. That's politics, and it's unfortunate.
All right, Senator Ted Cruz, thank you.
Thank you
very much. I know we saw you last week. Good to see you again this morning. Thanks. And I don't know, go get something done. I don't know what, but get something done. Anyway, thank you, Senator.